He never spoke, just drove. But the way he held the wheel, the way his eyes scanned the mirrors, wasn't like a normal driver. It was a skill forged in a place with no roads and no rules. They thought he was just a bus driver, until the night he had to remember how to evade an enemy he couldn't see. Welcome to the Everyday Hero. Before we begin this story of a city plunged into darkness and the one quiet man who held the map in his memory, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that true heroes are the ones you never notice, hit that subscribe button. These are the stories that must be told. The city was a creature of routine, and Arthur was one of its quiet heartbeats. For 31 years, his world had been the 22-foot-long, 8-foot-wide metal box, designated as Bus 7. His route, the 42B, was a winding artery that connected the gleaming glass and steel towers of downtown with the quiet, forgotten suburbs where the paint was peeling and the fences leaned. He was a ghost in a machine, a fixed point in the daily chaos of thousands of lives, utterly present and yet completely invisible. He arrived at the depot every morning at 4:45 a.m., a full half-hour before his shift. He didn't use that time to drink coffee or chat with the other drivers. He spent it with his bus. He'd walk the perimeter, his worn leather shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the greasy concrete. He'd run a hand along the tires, checking the pressure by feel. He'd wipe the morning dew from the wing mirrors himself, using a soft grey cloth he kept in his coat pocket. The younger drivers, with their phones and their loud music, called him a relic. He never heard them, or if he did, he never showed it. His driving was an art form of quiet efficiency. He never braked sharply, he never accelerated too fast. His turns were so smooth that the standing passengers barely swayed. He held the oversized steering wheel with a light, two-handed grip, his knuckles resting gently, his thumbs never hooked inside. It was a detail no one would notice, a grip taught for situations where a sudden jolt could break a thumb, a detail from a life no one on the 42B could ever imagine. His eyes were the most telling feature. They were a pale, washed-out blue, the color of a winter sky. They didn't just see the road ahead, they consumed it. They scanned rooftops, alleyways, the reflections in shop windows. He registered everyday faces, their stops, their habits. The passengers didn't notice him. He was an extension of the seat, a part of the ticket machine. To them, the name Arthur didn't exist. There was only the driver. That day had started no differently than the 10,000 days before it. A cold, persistent autumn rain washed the city in a grey film. The lights of headlights and neon signs bled into the wet asphalt. The inside of the bus smelled of damp coats and a quiet, collective weariness. Everyone was in their own world. A student, Maya, earbuds in, textbook open on her lap, oblivious. A man in a tailored suit, Mr. Sterling, typing furiously into his phone, his sighs of impatience audible over the hum of the engine. A tired mother, clutching the hand of her sleeping child, her head resting against the vibrating window. All of them living out their own dramas under the invisible protection of Arthur. It was 7:12 p.m. as the bus approached one of the city's busiest intersections. That's when it happened. First, a flicker. The lights inside the bus trembled, fluttered like a weak bird, and died. A moment of pure silence. Then the world outside joined them. The glowing peaks of the skyscrapers, the green of the traffic lights, the storefront displays, all extinguished in a single, silent breath. The city went quiet for 1 second. Then the chaos began. A symphony of car horns erupted, followed by the distant panicked shriek of sirens. The bus, its engine dead, rolled to a silent stop, now a metal island, in a sea of darkness and confusion. Inside Bus 7, the silence was broken by a collective gasp. The emergency lights, dim and red, cast long, eerie shadows across the passengers' faces. Mr. Sterling was the first to speak, his voice sharp with indignation. "What's going on? Driver, why have we stopped?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. His hands hadn't left the wheel. His gaze was fixed ahead, not at the gridlocked traffic, but beyond it, seeing the patterns in the chaos. He saw the logic of the panic, how the main arteries would clot first, how fear would spread like a contagion. His breathing was slow, even. While everyone else was reacting to the moment, he was already 3 steps ahead. "The power grid is down," he finally said, his voice calm and low, yet it cut through the rising murmur of fear. It was the most many of them had ever heard him say. "Well, do something," Sterling demanded, standing up. "Call someone." "We can't just sit here. The lines will be jammed," Arthur stated, not as an opinion, but as a fact. "No one is coming." He turned his head slightly, and his eyes met Maya's in the rearview mirror. She was pale, her textbook forgotten. He saw real fear in her eyes. It was a look he recognized. He had seen it before, in younger faces, in places far from this city, where the darkness held different kinds of dangers. That look solidified his decision. He pressed a sequence of buttons on the console. A low hiss of air, and the doors sealed shut. Then, with a turn of a key in a secondary ignition, a feature on older city buses, rarely used, a low rumble returned. The engine was on auxiliary power, weak but alive. "What are you doing?" a woman in the back cried out. Arthur didn't answer with words. He turned the large wheel. The bus lurched, pulling away from the curb and mounting the sidewalk with a heavy, groaning crunch. Passengers shouted in alarm. "Have you gone mad?" Sterling yelled, stumbling to regain his balance. Arthur ignored him. He navigated the bus slowly down the wide sidewalk, past the frozen cars and the bewildered faces of people staring out their windows. He reached the end of the block and faced a wall of traffic. A dead end. But Arthur didn't see a dead end. He saw an opening. To the right was a narrow alley, barely wider than the bus itself, used for garbage collection. It was dark, foreboding, and filled with dumpsters. No sane driver would ever consider it. Arthur considered it. His mind, a quiet repository of 30 years of observation, overlaid the city's official map with another one, his own. A map of shortcuts, of forgotten service lanes, of paths that existed between the documented lines. As he looked into that dark alley, he wasn't in a city anymore. The concrete walls were canyon rock, the dumpsters were impassable boulders, and the mission was the same as it had always been. Get the package from point A to point B. The package tonight was 14 frightened souls. "Hold on," he said. The 2 words were an order, not a suggestion. He angled the bus, its front corner clearing the brick wall of a building by inches. He reversed, the backup alarm shrieking into the chaos. He pulled forward again, a perfect 3-point turn executed in a space that seemed impossibly small. The bus groaned as its side mirror scraped against a dumpster with a screech of metal on metal. A passenger screamed, but they were in. The alley was a tunnel of blackness. Arthur switched on the powerful high-beam headlights, which cut a stark white path through the gloom. Rainwater gushed along the broken pavement. Rats scurried from the light. The passengers were silent now, their anger replaced by a mixture of terror and disbelief. They watched the brick walls slide past just inches from their windows. They felt every bump, every lurch. Mr. Sterling, holding onto a pole, his expensive suit now wrinkled, stared at Arthur's reflection in the windshield. He saw a man transformed. The quiet, slouching driver was gone. In his place was a figure of absolute focus, his posture straight, his jaw set. His hands on the wheel moved with an economy and precision that was mesmerizing. He wasn't just driving, he was navigating. How, how do you know this route? Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Arthur's eyes flickered to the mirror for a fraction of a second. I watch, he said simply. The memory that surfaced was not of a city street. It was of a dry riverbed in a desert at dusk. The sand the same color as the surrounding hills, the only path through a valley controlled by unseen eyes. His mission had been to transport a high-value asset, a scientist, through hostile territory. The path had been memorized from a satellite photo. Every rock, every turn. One wrong move meant capture. He had driven for 16 hours without lights, using only the ambient glow of the stars and the map in his head. This alley, by comparison, was a highway. They emerged from the alley into another street, smaller and less congested. But their relief was short-lived. A block ahead, a group of figures were gathered around a shattered storefront, their shapes menacing in the dark. Looters. Sterling's breath caught. Turn back. We have to go back. But Arthur knew that going back was never an option. Reversing through that alley was impossible. He assessed the situation. The looters were distracted. Their greed was their weakness. He needed a diversion. His eyes scanned his surroundings. A side street, a pile of trash cans, an idea, cold and clear, formed in his mind. He dimmed his headlights. He turned sharply into the side street, driving 100 feet before killing the engine and the lights, plunging them into absolute blackness. Be quiet, he commanded. Do not move. He slipped out of his seat and was gone from the bus before anyone could react. The passengers huddled in the dark, their hearts pounding. They could hear shouting from the main street. Then, a tremendous crash from the opposite direction, the sound of multiple metal trash cans toppling over, followed by the shattering of glass. The shouting from the main street turned, the figures running towards the new noise. A perfect diversion. Seconds later, Arthur was back in his seat, the door hissing shut behind him. He started the engine, turned on the lights, and pulled back onto the street, driving smoothly past the now empty storefront where the looters had been. He hadn't just avoided the threat, he had manipulated it. He had controlled the engagement. The passengers stared at him in utter awe. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. A deep, unnerving respect. Who was this man? They drove for what felt like an eternity, weaving a path through a broken city. Arthur seemed to have a sixth sense for trouble. He'd turn a block before they reached a fire. He'd navigate a series of one-way streets in reverse to avoid a police barricade. He used the reflection of his own headlights on wet, high-rise windows to see around corners. A technique of such subtle genius that no one even understood what he was doing. They just felt the results. Safety. The final obstacle was the old canal bridge, the main artery to the quieter suburbs where most of them lived. As they approached, they saw the problem. A multi-car pileup, completely blocking the entrance. It was impassable. Despair settled over the bus. They were so close. It's over, the mother whispered, pulling her child closer. We're stuck here. Arthur stopped the bus. He looked at the bridge, then to the left. Along the canal ran an old, decommissioned maintenance path, overgrown with weeds and barely visible in the dark. It wasn't a road. It was a relic of the city's industrial past, narrow and crumbling at the edges. A sign, barely legible, read, "No vehicles, risk of collapse." This was the final test. The path was their only way. He remembered it from his walks on his rare days off, mapping the city's forgotten bones, not for any purpose, just for the knowledge itself. Knowledge was ammunition you didn't have to carry. "Everyone to the right side of the bus," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Now!" The passengers scrambled, confused but obedient. The shift in weight was crucial. He turned the bus, its left wheels mounting the curb, the right wheels dipping onto the muddy shoulder of the maintenance path. The bus tilted at a dangerous angle. He drove forward, the vehicle groaning in protest. The right wheels were mere inches from the crumbling edge and the dark, cold water of the canal below. He didn't look at the water, he looked ahead, his focus absolute. The bus scraped against the concrete wall of the bridge's underpass, showering sparks into the night. He held the wheel steady, correcting for every slip, for every soft patch of mud. It was a masterclass in nerve and control. They cleared the bridge. They were on the other side. He pulled the bus back onto solid pavement, the vehicle settling with a grateful sigh. Silence. Then, someone started to clap. Soon the whole bus was filled with the sound of applause, a raw, emotional outburst of gratitude and shock. Arthur just kept driving. He started pulling over at their usual stops, or as close as he could get. One by one, they got off, not with the usual hurried indifference, but with a new reverence. "Thank you," the mother said, her eyes filled with tears. Maya, the student, paused at the door. I don't know what to say. You saved us." Finally, only Mr. Sterling was left. He walked to the front, his arrogance gone, replaced by a deep, humbled curiosity. He pulled out his wallet. "I want to give you something, please, for what you did." Arthur shook his head, not even glancing at the offered money. "Just doing my job." Sterling put his wallet away, defeated. He stood for a moment, then asked the question that hung in the air. "I've never seen anyone drive like that. The alley, the way you avoided those men, that bridge, it wasn't just driving. What did you used to do?" He paused. "Who are you?" Arthur looked at Mr. Sterling, his pale blue eyes holding a history of things unimaginable. He offered a small, sad smile. "I used to drive in places with worse traffic." He opened the door. Sterling nodded slowly, understanding that this was all the answer he would ever get. He stepped off the bus and watched as it drove away, its taillights disappearing into the quiet, dark suburb. Arthur finished the route, dropping the last passenger off. He drove the empty, scratched and dented bus back to the depot. He parked it in its designated spot. He walked through the silent building, clocked out, and headed home. No report was filed. No story was told. He just disappeared back into the fabric of the city, a ghost once more. Some men carry wars within them, not of nations, but of skill, of discipline, of silence. They don't wear medals or tell stories. They just watch, they learn, and they remember. Arthur never asked for recognition. He never needed it. But for 14 people on a night the world stopped, a quiet bus driver became a legend, a silent guardian who knew the way through the dark because he had lived in it before. They say heroes are the ones who run to... We'll see you in the next one. Until then, the next time you step onto a bus, take a moment to look at the driver. You never know who's really behind the wheel.